Good evening and welcome to episode 20 of the Jacksonian. As I have with me is the host of Locked On Nitty Lions, Zach Seyko, where we will be going over our take on Andy Nicky being hired to be the new OC at Penn State, the 2023 Peach Bowl preview. Is everybody too hard or too easy on James Franklin? Amongst other topics. And we got a great show for you, everybody. How you doing tonight, my man?
I'm good, Jackson. I appreciate you having me on your show.
Well, thank you for coming on, man. Zach, would you like to tell the people about yourself for a little bit?
Yeah, sure. So I'm the host of Locked On Nittany Lions over on YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. The daily podcast devoted to your Penn State Nittany Lions. Used to be the program director for ESPN Radio up in State College and do a little bit of high school play-by-play when the opportunities are there.
Well, we got ourselves a fun show, and
Yeah.
today we're going to start off with your reaction to Kansas OC Andy Nicky, which, by the way, he's assistant coach of the year. What was your take when he was the new replacement for Mike Yurchek?
So this was a really good hire, and if Penn State thinks it's a really good hire, then I'm going to side with them, right, Jackson? This was the top person, the top candidate on their offensive coordinator list, and what that tells me is one, Penn State, because I don't know that Mike Yursich was actually the prime candidate a few years back. I think, and we know for a fact that number one on the list this time around was Andy Kotelnicki. So if Penn State's able to go out, get their top guy, spend the money, James Franklin isn't kidding when he says that everybody at Penn State is aligned now when it comes to making these decisions about football. So I like his innovation. It's not like he settled for Penn State either. Oklahoma was targeting him as its next offensive coordinator. So there was some competition here. And the fact that Penn State was able to win is very telling.
Yeah, I mean, had the quarterback situation been a little healthier, especially Jalen Daniels, had he been healthier and
Mhm.
had Bean been healthier, I think we would have seen a lot better than an 8-win season. Like, shall we say, a 10-win season at Kansas?
Maybe I'm not the expert to talk about the Kansas Jayhawks. I mean, they impressed me when they played games that I did watch. Illinois, for example, they beat Oklahoma, right? But they did have their problems with the likes of the Texas Longhorns. So, I mean, an 8-4 team is an 8-4 team, especially with the roster that Kansas has. But I think there are some more underlying things that I probably couldn't speak to.
Well, and I wanted to go over a little bit about the good, bad, and the ugly of
Mhm.
2023 for Penn State. What was the good, bad, and ugly in your eyes?
I mean, the bad and the ugly, you can put them together. It's just the super ugly was the offense. This defense was elite. It was top five. The run defense is currently the best in the country at the end of the regular season here, number one in terms of yards per carry. The secondary was hovering around the top five, then had a little bit of a step back against Ohio State and then against Indiana. So they ended up finishing in the top 20. But this was a defense that could have gotten you to the college football playoff had the offense just done a little bit more. That's all they needed to do. They didn't need to bail out the defense anytime. The defense carried the team the entire season all the way through. Manny Diaz, all the superstars, Chop Robinson, Adisa Isaac, Denai Dennis Sutton, Abdul Carter, Kalen King, the entire defense, Curtis Jacobs, Kobe King. And that's what was bad. What was ugly is that Penn State knew. It's not like Penn State was okay, 10-2 is our goal, is our bar. The Big Ten championship was the goal. The college football playoff was the expectation. Penn State felt like it had a legitimate shot and it failed those expectations. Those weren't the goals that the media and the fans set for Penn State. Penn State set those goals, right? They told us that. James Franklin told us that this is what they believed that they were, and then their true colors were that they were a 10-2 team. The good thing is that Penn State is still a top 10 team, and they have a future to build around. They'll be competitive definitely in 2024. 2023 had a lot of growing pains, but I think the schedule's going to get harder, but if they go 10-2 again, That's not going to be short of expectations. I think that's exceeding them because of the type of schedule that they have. So going 10-2 is tomorrow's essentially, I don't want to say 12-0, but it's a lot better and people need to give it more credit in years to come with the way that the conferences are realigning.
Yeah, I think a lot of teams would love to be 10-2 in all of college football. And, I've noticed that there's some people that are way too hard on James Franklin, well, in my opinion.
Mhm.
But I know that there's some Penn State fans that aren't too happy with him. There's a
Yeah.
lot that are pretty happy with him. You yourself stated that you're pretty cool with how James Franklin is running
Mhm.
the program. Um, what is your take when people say, "Oh, well, Franklin should be on a hot seat"? Like, maybe it's just me now, but did they forget the accomplishments they had at Vandy and what he did at Penn State when he first arrived?
I think Penn State fans need to be realistic with what the expectations are, and James Franklin is the right coach for this new age of college football. You can't just plug in a Nick Saban or a Kirby Smart, and those guys aren't available to begin with. But who do you find that is going to right the wrongs that James Franklin has done? Sure, there's been some in-game coaching blunders that go back to when the team didn't have any scholarships. There were limits on the scholarships, and people were holding the coaching decisions then. In a matter of a few years' time, in 3 years' time, Jackson, he led them to a Big Ten championship win in a Rose Bowl. And then they fell short of, they finishing 10-2, 10-2, right? I get it, but it's not like Michigan and Ohio State are a bunch of pushovers, okay? That's an
Yeah.
excuse that can be considered a cop out here, but I don't know what coach you're gonna get that is as enthusiastic about James Franklin, that's gonna be able to recruit the way that he does in Happy Valley. Everyone thinks that Penn State is this. I don't know, that it should be the mecca of college football when it comes to recruiting players nationally. This isn't the days of the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s where you could recruit your region and be very successful. Kids from California are going to Florida, vice versa, going to Michigan, all over the place. And James Franklin understands that. And he's done things to push Penn State out of its comfort zone. Penn State was very tradition oriented. And I like that James Franklin essentially was this outsider that said, look, you adapt or you're going to be left behind. And we are going to be 7-5, 8-4. We're not going to be competitive. James Franklin was the one to get Penn State to approve a lot of these changes and has had a
Yeah.
lot of positive influence. So if you want to complain about 10-2 and not having any college football wins, you could be like Nebraska in this case, where they are cycling through head coaches because they weren't content with Bo Pelini going 9-3 and all the coaches that they let go before I was even really paying attention to college football either. So you could be in that boat as well here. So yes, people are too hard on James Franklin, but at some point, you have to live up to your contract. I mean, you are making this kind of money. That's why people say it's like, well, James Franklin isn't making pennies on the dollar. He's making millions, and he's one of the top 10 paid coaches. So, how long before you say, okay, 9-3, 10-2, that's not good enough? You need to see at least some progress here. Getting into the college football playoff, even if they had lost, would have been progress. But I think Penn State, with the facilities, being able to go outbid other Power 5 programs for the coaches that they want, and being able to retain guys like Manny Diaz, who would naturally go on to head coaching jobs, but Penn State able to make competitive offers to keep the coaching staff as strong as possible. It is very impressive, and I don't know how many other people would have made the positive changes that go unnoticed that James Franklin has made.
That's true. I mean, every time I always heard people criticize Franklin, I'm thinking, let's not forget, people got pretty mad at Jim Harbaugh for the longest time because he couldn't
Yeah.
get the job done against Ohio State. But then once Michigan got it done in 2021, everybody's forgotten that they were pretty mad at Harbaugh at the time. So, I mean, it's a good thing that they had a bad year in the COVID season in 2020.
Yeah, I mean, the 2020 season was something to forget for a lot of schools. Penn State, I know from Penn State's point of view is that It was difficult for the players being isolated, the coaches, and this is a very emotional program. James Franklin is an
Mhm.
emotionally driven person. So when there's no juice, when there's no desire to be there, the stadiums are empty. You can't see mom and dad, you can't see your brothers, your sisters, your family members, and you have to isolate. All your meetings are done over Zoom, right? I mean, that was if if there was a bigger mountain to climb, it was that 2020 season with all the restrictions that were put in place. And notice how quickly Penn State has come back to where it should be.
Yeah, but, I just kinda wonder if there's, like, a, COVID curse. Like, if you had a great year in the COVID year, you've gotten cursed over the next few years, whereas you had a bad year in the COVID year, you've been blessed in the next few years.
I mean, it's just kind of it's a reality check, right? That wasn't the reality of college football for one season. You played only
Right.
your conference opponents. You had just limited mobility with what you were able to do. So programs that aren't typically good, a Northwestern and an Indiana, are going to benefit because and that was before the transfer portal and NIL, right? Or the activity of the transfer portal, I should
Oh,
say.
yeah.
You had transfers, but you didn't have it like this here in 2023. So because think Michael Penix was on that Indiana team, and
Yep.
Northwestern was a very veteran heavy type of team as well. Ohio State had the shortened schedule, right? You had games canceled. You never knew if you were going to play. So it just kind of who got a luck of the draw there in 2020. I don't think there's, I don't know that I can understand what you're saying. Like, all the fortunes have switched. And yeah, but I think that programs were able to, James Franklin was able to get back to what he does best and be an in person recruiter. He couldn't do that
Yeah.
in 2020 and barely 2021. Once those
Yeah.
restrictions were fully gone, Penn State has a top 10 class in
There you go.
2022, a competitive class in 2023, and they're going to have a top 15 class in 2024. So, programs like Indiana and Northwestern just kind of had that everybody else took a step back, so they were able to take a step forward. It was just kind of coincidental.
Well, I will say, though, I am sad that you guys couldn't beat Ohio State or Michigan this season, but I think Ole Miss is kinda feeling the same way. They're like, "Oh, we could have
Mhm.
beaten Bama or Georgia, but it's gonna be a quite a battle in the Peach Bowl between the Penn State Nittany Lions and the Ole Miss Rebels." So, I mean, I've sometimes called Ole Miss the Penn State of the SEC, and I've called Penn
Mhm.
State the Ole Miss of the SEC, but what's your take on this game?
I mean, Penn State's a favorite right now. This is the most ideal matchup you could have got. Now, outside of, I would have liked Oklahoma, I would have liked Missouri. Basically, anybody that's not a Group 5 team. I like when Penn State gets to play some SEC opponents because these are the two best conferences in all of the country. So this is a conference battle here, and who gets the bragging rights? Because all I hear is how great the SEC is, and yet the Big Ten seems to be doing a pretty good job of beating the SEC in head-to-head matchups, except when it comes to the national titles, because Georgia and Alabama, and Clemson in there the last 5 years, right, have kind of alternated in national titles, and the Big Ten has not won a national title. So there's that argument of it. But when it comes to head-to-head, and usually in bowl season, Big Ten does very well. The SEC, I don't think it's not this predominant, oh, they're the extreme gold standard here. The Big Ten and the SEC, you can have an argument for them being 1A, 1B. So that's why I really like this matchup. I would have liked Missouri as well. I like what the Tigers have done this season. Lane Kiffin's a very interesting coach. I like that this is an offensive versus a defensive matchup. It kind of tells, okay, how good is Penn State's defense really? Because you can beat up on Michigan State, you can beat up on Delaware, you can beat up on Iowa because those offenses aren't very good. But Ole Miss, who has Jackson Dart, Sean Judkins, an offensive-minded coach in Lane Kiffin, right? You're going to get your test, but I think the story still is, what is this offense and how much better can they get? Drew Aller, Nicholas Singleton, Katron Allen. Is Trey Wallace going to be back? All those guys are young. The main faces of your offense are still young. They're all coming back next season. I mean, this is essentially a preseason game for 2024.
Yeah, and what I love about this game is that this is gonna be the first time you guys meet, and
Mm,
I can't help but notice some historical significance when Penn State went up against Missouri, especially in the 1970 Orange Bowl, where
mhm.
Penn State was trying to show President Nixon, "Hey, there's us too. You're forgetting about us. We've won like 20 something straight games. We were unbeaten 68 and we're unbeaten 69. You're forgetting about us, but you're thinking more about that Texas Arkansas game. Good grief."
Yeah, I mean, you're more familiar with the history than I am, so, I'm glad that Penn State and Ole Miss get to meet for the first time. I just like a good old Big Ten SEC matchup. It'll be a fun one, even with the opt-outs, Chop Robinson declaring for the draft, more players are gonna follow behind that, so, but like I said, it's a look into what 2024 could be like, especially because you have Drew Aller, Singleton, Allen, Trey Wallace, most likely Tyler Warren, all those guys coming back, the faces of your offense.
Well, let's take a look at that 2024 schedule. I can't help
Yep.
but notice that there's not a single shred of Michigan and there's not a bit of Michigan State because I know that Penn State doesn't have a single permanent opponent in this
Mhm.
new edition of the Big Ten. What do you think about it so far? I know this way too early, but what do you think?
That's a tough schedule. I mean, you're looking right at it on screen here, but I can describe it for any audio listeners, right? You're going from at home against UCLA to on the road at USC. Yeah, you got to buy, but that's your first time taking a trip in the middle of the season to the West Coast. And then you go on the road again against Wisconsin at Camp Randall, which is not a good environment either. That's a tough
Ugh,
environment. And Luke
that's
Fickle
scary.
is a good head coach. Then you host Ohio State. Then you host Washington, who is a college football playoff contender, is in the college football playoff this season and is the number 2 seed, right? Purdue's supposed to be better, and then you go back on the road, right? So even though Purdue and Minnesota are going to be competitive teams because they're in the Big Ten, those are back-to-back games on the road. And then how good is Maryland going to be, right?
Oh
They're
Lord.
kind of a wild card in this case. I think any of those final three games can be after you get through that gauntlet. It's like how much stamina, how much do you have left in the tank to really go through? Penn State's not going undefeated in 2024. If they do, oh my goodness, I don't know what I'd shave my head. I don't know what I would do here in
Don't
this
shave
case.
your head. You got awesome hair, man.
Well,
Don't do
I appreciate that, but I got to figure out something to hold myself accountable because they would certainly be proving me wrong. Do I think 10-2 is realistic? Absolutely, just because that schedule is so unforgiving. But Penn State can build the team and get the compliments out of the transfer portal to win most of those games. It's just a matter of win the ones that you know you're supposed to win and then let those ones that are toss-ups kind of dictate themselves. 9-3 isn't a bad schedule either. I record either. I think that gets you into a 12-team college football playoff with the way that this schedule lines up. Those are all right. You're playing 8 or 9 games that are essentially toss-ups.
Well, I will say in this new playoff system we're gonna have next year, you don't have to win the Big Ten. You'll just have to get at least 10, 11 wins,
Yeah.
especially if you're in the Big Ten or SEC. So, I mean, I think the committee is going to be a little easier on you guys for sure.
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, when I want Penn State to earn it. If they're gonna get in, I don't want the
True,
committee to go easy on them. They need to have the resume. But I
that's
don't 8-4 doesn't get you in, but that's a very
true.
realistic possibility. Penn State, if Penn State were to go 8-4 and miss out on the 12 team, because the excuse is at least from the fans are saying, well, why is it's such an excuse that all Penn State will make a 12-team playoff. So if Penn State misses out on the 12-team playoff in its first year of existence and goes 8-4 or something like that. Oh, man, it is not gonna be a fun time over here in Happy Valley.
I think everybody's going to be really competitive with each other in 2024 in the Big Ten. I mean, next season, what do you think? If this year we had the 12-team playoff, how many playoff games do you think Penn State would win?
Well, they would go. I think the bowl projection was they would go on the road against Ohio State. Uh,
Oh,
Depending on what
Lord.
kind of opt outs you would have. I mean, I like Penn State in that game, and they were only one score away. They had a touchdown called back. Almost, it seemed like everything almost broke in Ohio State's favor. You can't replicate that. Okay, you have to look at college
Mhm.
football games. It's like if Oklahoma and Texas played again. Oklahoma forced 3 Texas turnovers. That's not sustainable in those kinds of games. That's good that you did it. You want to force turnovers. I'm not saying you can't, but you have to do things that are sustainable. But what did Penn State do that was sustainable? They had Ohio State to 1.9 yards per carry. Okay. Kyle McCord, that Ohio State offense had 13 points up until late in the game. If you get, if you get some calls to go your way, Penn State definitely can win that game. But it's certainly not easy. And I wonder coming off of that Michigan game, just how the setup would have been because Ohio State would have fell short of expectations. Maybe Penn State can go in there as a surprise underdog and get revenge because Ohio State's expectations were to win the game and make the Big Ten championship. So it's a possibility. Is it still unlikely that they don't win? Yeah, in that case, just because of the matchup that they were hosting, I think they would beat a lot of these other teams. But unfortunately for this season, Penn State wasn't elite. But we need to figure out, okay, are they actually top 10? And that's what this Ole Miss game does, Jackson.
That will be for sure. I mean, to tell you the truth, I still haven't figured out a winner yet, but I got another week to figure this out.
Mhm.
Because I mean, on the one hand, I really like what Ole Miss has been doing, and on the other hand, I like what Penn State's been doing. But one other thing I noticed is James Franklin seems to win his bowl games, but Lane Kiffin just can't get it done in the bowl games.
In the case of that, I mean, James Franklin has gone back and forth in some of them. They have three. They have three New Year's Six bowl wins, right? The Fiesta Bowl, the Cotton Bowl, and no Rose Bowl here in this, or the one Rose Bowl. Excuse me, I'm
The
referring back to the
granddaddy of them
USC game.
all.
Yeah. So they're 1-1 in Rose Bowls. Like, right, they lost to USC, they lost to Kentucky over years past. They beat Boston College a while ago. But Penn State, I mean, does pretty well in its bowl games. They lost to Arkansas, so they are slightly over 500 here, but they're not perfect. And Ole Miss, it's hard to predict opt outs. It really is, and you don't get those guys from
Mm.
the transfer portal, but at least you know what you have in this case.
Well, anytime I'm looking at opt-outs, I tend to make sure I think about, okay, which guy at this school is most likely? Because I mean, let's say you're looking at Ohio State, Missouri. There's going to be a lot more opt-outs at Ohio State than there are at Missouri because let's be honest, nobody at Missouri wants to opt out against playing Ohio State.
I mean, well, if they have a future in the NFL, they very well could. These bowl games just don't have the same
True.
they don't have the same flavor that they did a long time ago. There's too much at stake. It's not worth getting injured. We've seen that too much over the past decade.
When I was younger, a few years back, I used to get pretty sad or upset at players that opted out. But then I grew
Yep.
up a little bit and I realized, you know, these guys have families to feed, they got themselves to look out for, and they got bills to pay. If I were in their shoes, of course I'm gonna opt out. And all these people that go, "Oh, they just don't wanna play for a team like when I watched football back in the day." Okay, then why don't you strap on a helmet? Why don't you strap on a jersey? Or better yet, why don't you put your kid on the field, then come back and tell us how spoiled these players are.
Yeah, I think you put it. I think you put it the right way. Everyone's a coach. Everyone's an armchair quarterback until you have to.
Oh man, that would be funny if we saw like a player or a coach on an interview, just be like, "Hey, all you armchair quarterbacks or coaches, why don't you come on over here and put on a uniform?" I wonder what the people that are drinking beers watching game would do then. That'd
Yeah,
be
yeah.
it'd be hilarious. But back to seriousness. Anyway, um, if Manny Diaz leaves for Duke, because it looks like he's one of the two candidates to be the next head coach at Duke, who's your candidates for defensive coordinator at Penn State?
I mean, it's kinda late at this point. The more that time goes on, the more that I think that Manny Diaz is going to stick around for at least one more season. I don't know who you're going to I mean, you could still kinda the same thing, hire someone away, like an Andy Kotelnicki could hire a defensive coordinator away from somebody else, but I think Penn State stays in-house. I think they'll promote Anthony Poindexter. I think he'll get promoted and be the next defensive coordinator.
I like that name, Poindexter. That'd be pretty cool. Get somebody like that. Or, maybe see if we can get somebody from K-State, because I mean, I know Kansas State's had pretty good defense this season. That'd be pretty funny. You get the OC from
Yeah,
Kansas, then get the defensive coordinator for Kansas State. It's like,
yeah,
huh, we hated each other, but now we're gonna work together. Okay, I'll call this season truce.
yeah.
There we go. And it'll be fun to see what happens, but and it's like we stated a little while ago. Everybody's way too hard on James Franklin. They're just throwing the baby out with the bathwater on him.
I I guess so, right? Penn State just hasn't lived up to it. They're demanding expectations, but when you get paid, it comes with the territory, in the sense, Jackson.
That is for sure. Who's that autograph next to you on the helmet?
Let's see what side it's on because I do have two on the side here. So that's Sean Clifford and KJ Hamler. On the other side of it, it's Jair Brown.
Oh, sweet. You got Clifford the Big Blue Nitty Lion signing a helmet. All right.
Yeah,
You were lucky, man. That is so awesome.
yeah.
It, I mean, I see the Happy Valley lights, the
Hmm.
inside the light. That is so awesome.
Yeah,
You guys,
yeah. Behind me. No, I appreciate you complimenting the setup.
oh, I love it, man. It's gonna be it's terrific. I mean, I think Penn State's got a bright future. It's again everybody's too hard on them, but they do have a bit of a tough schedule next year. But it's a good thing they're not going to have Ohio State, Michigan annually. I mean, that's the
Mm.
bright side. No divisions right there.
Yeah, it breaks away from tradition, but it's not like you're replacing them with a bunch of FCS schools. It's Washington, USC, UCLA, right? If
Yeah.
anything, I think I'd rather them face Ohio. I like it. I like that every single week is going to have implications on the season. You knew that Penn State was going to win every other game except for a 50-50 toss up between Michigan and Ohio State. You knew that everything else was a win across the board.
Oh yeah. I do like it that you guys are going to Morgantown next year, but I will say that's going to be nerve wracking.
Yeah, it depends what West Virginia looks like, what they're able to do in the transfer portal. Neil Brown, good 8-4 team this season, but can you replicate it now? I mean, I still expect Penn State to win that game, even though it's on the road.
That may be like the only time, we see a Big Ten school on ESPN or ABC or something like that next season because of, well,
Yep.
obvious reasons, the TV contract.
Yep.
But it's going to be fun to see Big Ten on CBS for the full time next year. I mean, I did love the setup that they had this year where it was just they were kind of juggling the SEC and the Big Ten. Whereas, like, I know that it was exclusively the SEC, but, like, years past, when they started with SEC on CBS, they kinda juggled the old Big East and the SEC.
Yeah. Yeah, right. No, the TV media rights deals have definitely changed the landscape of college football, and that's what's driving a lot of all these changes. I mean, money talks, right?
Right. But I think we should get a lot of these schools away from ESPN. Just tell them, "Oh, look, you don't need them, they need you."
Yeah.
But I do wonder though if we're ever going to see like Florida State joining the Big Ten because I mean I know I've heard that they don't want to join the SEC. I don't know how true this is, and this whole kerfuffle that happened last week where the playoff committee decided, yeah, you're unbeaten, but you guys fell apart. We're not going to put you in. You think that's going to like spearhead another conference realignment move or? Or am I throwing the baby out with the bathwater in this case?
It ultimately depends. The ACC added a bunch of schools. The Big 12 added schools. Right, there's all this new. Everything got strengthened here. So I know that there were some rumors that Florida State could be exploring leaving the ACC, but there's the contract that they're in with the grant of rights. Given that, so it's not an easy exit to him. Where they go? Where would they go? The SEC, the Big 10, the Big 12. It ultimately depends here.
Thank you for coming on, and, for those who'd like to, talk with you about Penn State, where can they find you?
Yeah, Locked On Nittany Lions on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. On X at Zach_Seyko at Locked On Nittany. Jackson, I appreciate the time. I'm so glad that I could get the chance to come onto your show, talk more things than just Penn State, right? Talk some other college football. So I appreciate the
Thank you for coming
conversation.
on. Well, thank you for coming on, man, and it's much appreciated, and if you like content such as this, or if you like, seeing updates of what Jacksonian episodes you're gonna see, you can find it on Twitter and on Instagram and on Threads, and if you like this content, like, comment, subscribe to youtube.com at JacksonJohnson979, and I'll catch you next time. Stay safe, stay warm, it's cold out, everybody.